Okay. Welcome, everybody. Very happy to have you here. We have a lot of competition from exercise classes now on Saturday morning, so glad to have an audience. Oh, come on in. So this is a recent trip that my daughter and I took to Ethiopia. We couldn't figure out when to go and where to go because we were going in August. I was going because I had a conference in Cape Town, but August was the date we decided on, but August was the worst month to travel according to all the travel information because in the north it was cold and rainy and in the south it was hot. And we couldn't figure out what to do. So we had an itinerary. And then Abiy became president and the borders between Ethiopia and Eritrea were open. They had like a wonderful reunion. I have some pictures of the Ethiopian president and the Eritrean president after 20 years of no relationships or battles or whatever. They made up and they opened the borders. I find the history of current Ethiopia very moving, even though the history of Ethiopia is about 3,000 years old at least. Anyway, we tried to go to Eritrea. We got a guide and a hotel and everything, and the trouble was we couldn't be sure of getting a visa because my daughter's in Australia, and when she called the Eritrean embassy in Australia, nobody responded, and when I called in Washington, nobody responded, so we were worried that maybe we would be stuck at the airport. We could get there, but maybe we wouldn't be allowed in. So we scratched Eritrea, sorry to say, from our itinerary, and then decided that it wouldn't be too cold in the north and too warm in the south, so we combined the north and the south in our final trip after we made many, many changes. And that's my daughter there, and somebody recommended Awazi Tours, and they were very good. We had excellent guides and excellent drivers, which in Ethiopia is something because the roads are hardly good. They're terrible. Not so much in Addis, but in the south. So that's the story, and that's, couldn't find my pointer, but that's Ethiopia spelled in Amharic. I hope we have a genuine person here who knows what I'm...
Someone right here.
Yeah, that's it. So she promised to correct anything I might say that's wrong. She won't do it. Okay, that's very comforting. Thank you, because I'm sure everything I'm saying is wrong. But I think it's Ethiopia. It says Ethiopia and Amharic. So those were the dates we were there, and we enjoyed it. The last 2 dates we have to scratch because we both got sick and never left our beds, but nothing serious, nothing that would happen to you if you went there. So this is Awazi Tours, and I have to say that the first night that I got to the airport after flying for, 22 hours from San Diego, there were all these people with names, name cards in the airport, and my name was not among them. So, and it was like 10 o'clock at night, so he did say it would be outside, so I went outside with my luggage, and I still couldn't find anybody. There was nobody outside. And I was walking around, it was dark, and there was nobody there. And finally, somebody said something about helping, and I said, he said, what hotel? And I said, Friendship International. And he said, oh, the buses are downstairs, just go down the ramp. And that's true. So down there were buses, and more important, my Awazi guide showed up with my name, and he'd been waiting for me all that time. But, well, I can't say everything was wonderful ever after, because we went to this Friendship International hotel, and by that time it was around midnight, and the elevator didn't work, so I had to wait in the lobby for a while. Very nice hotel, but the elevator didn't work, the phone didn't work, the television didn't work, but there was hot water and there was electricity, so not to complain. And it was a nice room. And so the next morning my daughter flew from Australia and knocked on the door, and there she was. So we had our very good 12 days together. So there's 3 parts to this, and I don't know how much we'll get to today. because I have to show you every picture I took now. So the first part, we spent a couple of days in Addis Ababa, the capital, and we went back there too, so there's some pictures from there. And then we went south to the Omo Valley where the tribal people live. I'm wearing something that you'll see a lot in Addis, but you will not see in the tribal people because they don't wear that many clothes. But this is what I'm wearing. I was told it's called a shema, and you'll see many of these. Very pretty, I think. So the Omo Valley, we spent a few days there, and it was not that hot. It was very interesting, but it was hard traveling because the roads, except for the ones built by the Chinese, are really bad. And then we went north to Lalibela, where the famous rock-hewn churches are, and you'll see that, but probably not today because I'll do another show of the rest of the slides. Actually, in November, I'm going to show pictures from Rwanda. I went to Ethiopia, then I went to my conference in Cape Town. And then I went to Rwanda, which was very impressive, so I'm anxious to show you Rwanda. And then I'll come back to Ethiopia sometime next year or something. And then I went to Uganda. And I don't have very many pictures from there because I wasn't there very long. Okay, so here we are in Ethiopia. It was very interesting that we had a book on tape that we were reading, audible books. And it was, I can't remember the name of it, but it was written by a woman from Atlanta who adopted a number of Ethiopian children. And it turned out she's married to a lawyer that I know quite well from the Right to Die movement. And it was a long story about this woman who opened an orphanage for, there were many orphaned Ethiopian children and people who came to adopt them, and what she had to go through to keep the orphanage going. So that was very interesting. During the course of our travels, we would listen to this book. It gave quite a different picture of Ethiopia than what we would see. So here we are in Addis, and the first thing was a city tour. Here's a map. So again, I don't have my pointer, but the 3 stars are where we went. So the middle one is Addis. And then from there we went south to the second star on the bottom, where we took a flight to Arba Minch, which is, what is it? It's a big city. I don't think it's the capital of anything, I'm not sure. And from there we spent several days, I don't know how, can't remember how many, going to the different tribes in the Omo Valley. It was interesting. Different variations of primitive, a lot of political problems they have there, and economic problems. And then from there we flew to Lalibela, the star on the top. And I have to say that our weather was very good everywhere, and our dire forecasts of cold and rainy and hot really didn't materialize. You can see from this map that Eritrea is right in the north, and our original plan had been to fly from Addis to Asmara, the capital of Eritrea, and then go to a place on the Red Sea, which would have been very interesting, but we didn't do it. So there's Djibouti on the right-hand border there. I have very fond memories of Djibouti because, not that I've ever been there, but when I was in Oman, which is not on this map, there were a lot of people from Djibouti who lived in the southern part of Oman, Shalala. And they were very nice people, and that's what I know about Djibouti, so we didn't get there, unfortunately. There's Somalia, which is very unstable right now. And then on the south is Kenya, which we did drive to the border there to see one of the tribes. I've been in Kenya before. And then there's Uganda, which is not that far away, but it took many hours on the flight to get there. Oh, that was from South Africa. And I'm not even sure what's on the left. So you can see that it's in the middle of many countries that have been unstable, that are unstable, that are now stable. A very interesting part of the world, really. It's the flag, which has great symbolism, which I don't know right now. I just showed this to show the relief, the difference in terrain. That is, the central part is quite mountainous, as is the northern part. And much of it is very green and lush, even though there are drought conditions going on. The Ethiopian highlands are the largest continuous mountain range in Africa, and that's what you're looking at here. And it also has the most UNESCO World Heritage Sites in all of Africa. I'm not sure how many, I think over 100. Because it's so historic and it's been around so long, and as you'll see later, the only country in Africa that has never been occupied by a foreign country. It's also been very progressive in its foreign policy. That is, one of the founding members of the United Nations, the Group of 24, the Non-Aligned Movement, and the Organization of African Unity. So it's not an isolated country by any means, even though it has had a rather unstable history. It's landlocked, and it's split by the Great Rift Valley. How many have been to the Great Rift Valley or Africa? Or nobody been to, well, how many been to Africa?
Yes.
Good. And to anybody to Ethiopia? You gotta find out. Okay. Anybody been to the Great Rift Valley? I remember visiting there a long time ago in Kenya and how beautiful it was. The Maasai were there. But the Great Rift Valley extends all the way through Ethiopia. So it goes with the mountains and the valleys. And there are archaeological findings there going back to 3 million years. In fact, we'll see the remains of Lucy, who is one of the archaeological finds, one of the first human finds in Africa, anywhere. So it's an important site. There are many important sites, but Lalibela is one of them from the 12th and 13th centuries. So we're talking about an old civilization here. So the capital is Addis, and the prime minister is Abiy Ahmed, and as I said, he's new. He is welcomed by the most Ethiopians. You saw the singing and dancing in this big rally in Addis when he became president, and all during, we saw rallies on his behalf too. And especially because, which we'll talk about in a minute here, he's freed thousands of political prisoners who were imprisoned during the last administration. Thousands of them. And people who went in exile into other countries have come back. This is not a totally unvarnished joy, because some of these people are conservative people who are not crazy about Abiy, or they're tribal people. Ethiopia's politics are quite tribal, and they don't like the tribe that he's from particularly, but they're back. And we went to the airport several times, as it turned out. And each time it looked like some kind of mob scene. It turned out that people were welcoming these exiles from who had left Ethiopia and were coming back. Sometimes the crowd was scary. So there's a lot of different languages. There's a population of Ethiopia is over 100 million people. That's a big country. With growing, I'm not sure what percent the growth rate is, but it's high. I think it's a major problem to accommodate all the people that are coming to and being born in Ethiopia. The birr is the currency. Excuse me. There are a lot of things I would have bought if I had small change, but I didn't have any birrs. So. There's many languages in Ethiopia. Seats for Anne somewhere?
Yeah, I see.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Amharic was the language that we knew most about. We didn't know anything about it, but there are lots more languages there that are spoken. And about 44% of the population is Orthodox Christians. And about 34% of the population are Muslim. And then there are Protestants and traditional beliefs, essentially animists in the South especially. A few Jews left. You may remember the Falashas, who were Ethiopian Jews, who were mostly airlifted out to Israel, I would say about 8 years ago. I don't remember that. But there's still some left of Jewish heritage there. Apparently, the Muslims and the Ethiopians and the Christians get along very well in Ethiopia. They celebrate each other's holidays. They live together, and there's no problem. All they need is a divisive leader who is going to create a problem, but right now, they get along fine. It's the second largest, most populous country in Africa. And for a long time, it was the third poorest country in the world. Remember, we all had to eat our food because the people in Ethiopia were starving, which we never could make the connection exactly, but it was always starving Ethiopians. Well, they're not starving anymore. And at one time, more than 50% of the population lived below the poverty line. It was the highest poverty rate in the world. But this is a picture of Addis Ababa. Come on in, Irma. There's a seat somewhere. So it's the from 2000 to 2016, 16 years, Ethiopia was the third fastest growing country of more than 10 million people in the world. And that's measured by the gross domestic product. The country's poverty rate fell to 31% by 2011. It's fallen a lot since then. And the economic outlook is pretty good, with an economic expansion of about 6% a year. And you know, ours is about 2% at the max through 2022. So only India and Myanmar were expected to grow faster. So it's quite remarkable, and you see both the old Ethiopia and the new Ethiopia wherever you go. Come on in. I think there's still a seat, isn't there?
Yeah,
It's not here.
Okay. So that's the good view of Addis. Doesn't all look that way. So, as I said, Ethiopia has never been colonized by a foreign country, except that there was an invasion by Mussolini for 5 years, which has lent, you know, it's interesting about being colonized by a foreign country because the Moroccans speak French and you can buy wonderful French rolls in bakeries there, and there's Italian influences and Portuguese influences in Africa and all sorts of influences. So there is an Italian influence in Ethiopia, as there's a good relationship with Italy, even after Mussolini's not good occupation at all, and Italian food around and other influences that show that even this five-year period of occupation did change the culture somewhat. It's the world's largest landlocked country, and it is, you know this, okay. It was ruled by a monarchy. By whom? Emperor Haile Selassie. We'll talk about that in a minute. For a long time before Abiy came in, the government, the media, TV, newspapers, radio, was under government control and now liberalized. And here he is reading an Ethiopian paper. I dare you, with the exception of one person here, to try to read that newspaper. The letters are not anything we've ever seen before. Okay, this is more about Abiy. This is what The Economist says. And don't forget, he's only been in power since April of this year. As well as pursuing peace, its new leader has lifted a state of emergency, welcomed back exiled dissidents freed thousands of political prisoners and vowed to privatize lumbering state-owned enterprises. So denationalizing. The big question mark hangs over Eritrea, the North Korea of Africa. I don't think that's an apt comparison. I don't think Eritrea is like North Korea myself, but anyway, it's called the North Korea of Africa. And this is Abiy. He's 42 years old. He's been in the government for a long time. He's the 15th Prime Minister. He is, his heritage is mixed Muslim and Christian. He's a scientist. He, the 19-year leadership which preceded him was stable, but also very brutal and repressive. He was in that government, actually. I'm looking for the quote that says he's a combination of Barack Obama, Nelson Mandela, and Gorbachev. It's sort of sad that we, and wait till I tell you about the leader of Rwanda too. It's sort of sad that the African countries have better leadership than some of them. Anyway, so he's lifted the state of emergency, ordered the release of thousands of prisoners. I think just recently he released another 5,000 prisoners. He allowed dissidents to return home, unlocked channels of websites and TV channels, and ended the state of war with Eritrea by giving up some of the disputed boundary territory. There was an attempt to apparently assassinate him in June. He is going to have many political enemies, there's no question about it. There are tribal warfares, there are conservatives who don't like what he's doing. So we'll see how long he survives there. Here he is with the president of Eritrea. They actually hugged at the border. And this president's reputation has sort of changed from a complete dictator to not such a bad guy after all. So he's passed a series of reforms. Yes, so we talked about that. It is possible that Ethiopia would have a genuine democracy, which would be refreshing. There was killing of political dissidents before, torture, human rights violations, all sorts of things. That's why you can understand those thousands of people we saw in the square in Addis singing and dancing because of the new prime minister. There's still been a number of ethnic-based clashes. Hundreds have been killed, and more than 2.8 million people have been internally displaced during the previous regime, and even still, making Ethiopia second to only Syria in the question of internally displaced people, even now. So, this is the one, yeah. Comparison with Nelson Mandela, Justin Trudeau, Barack Obama, and Mikhail Gorbachev. That's quite an illustrious people to be compared with. He's reshuffled his cabinet, fired a series of controversial, hitherto untouchable civil servants, including the head of Ethiopia's prison service. He's lifted bans on websites and other media, freed thousands of political prisoners, ordered the partial privatization of massive state-owned companies, ended a state of emergency imposed to quell widespread unrest, and removed 3 opposition groups from a list of terrorist organizations. That's a lot to accomplish since June. And this is similar to the rally that we saw when the man was singing. That's a lot of people. We saw these kind of rallies all over Ethiopia during our stay there. It was a little scary to see all these mobs of people in the street. But they were there for a good reason. They were mostly happy people. So there's 3.5 million people who live in Addis. It's quite remarkable, and it shows. It's a very crowded city. In 2011, they had serious inflation, but it's improved, and the GDP was the lowest in the world, but it's now risen. They have a lot of agricultural land. There's a lot of political problems with the agriculture, including possible problems with China, who has scooped up quite a bit of it. The productivity is low and droughts are not good, does not help. And so a lot of people have moved around, and that accounts for the internal displacement. So the Constitution says the right to own land belongs only to the state and the people, and citizens may lease land up to 99 years, but are unable to mortgage properties or sell them. Apparently that's still true and probably changing at this point. So here's a very nice bank building, which is in contrast to some of the back alleys that you'll see soon. So here it is again in context with other countries, and with and you can see it's landlocked. But with the opening of Eritrea, they were one country at one time. It could become one country again, in which case Ethiopia would have a port, although I haven't heard that discussed as an important consideration. And here you can see where it is in relation to the rest of the countries of Africa. So it is in the mountains. There's an elevation of almost 8,000 feet. The climate is fairly mild throughout the year, and the seasons are defined by rainfall. So we had some rain in Addis, but not very much. That was supposed to be the heavy rainy season. The average rainfall is about 47 inches, but that doesn't count the people that don't get any rainfall at all. In Addis, the average temperature is about 61 degrees Fahrenheit. So here is, I'm going to start with Addis and see how far we get in an hour or less. So there she is wearing a shema. And the first place our guides took us, no, this is the airport. Very nice new airport. So I flew from San Diego to Houston, Turkish Airlines to Istanbul, then to Addis. I think, I don't know, 22 hours or 24 hours or whatever it was. And it didn't cost me anything because I use frequent flyer miles. And United has these relationships with Turkish Airlines, Ethiopian Airlines. So it was very handy, although probably not the shortest routing in the world, but that's the way it was. This is not relationship to anything, but I like Ethiopian art, and this is sort of traditional art that you see mostly in the north. These sticks that they're holding have some religious purpose. I'm going to show them again later, and I can't remember what they are. And there's quite a bit of contemporary Ethiopian art, which I didn't see too much of, but they're definitely around. So these are women with their shemas, like mine. And these different ethnic populations are living together, especially in the south in the Omo Valley. And you'll see some of them. They do not dress like this. Some of them hardly dress at all. It's hot in the Omo Valley. And women's role is not great, but there is a steady representation. About almost 80% of women work in some capacity, and a quarter of the parliament is female. Not bad. But about 85% of Ethiopian women reside in the rural areas, which you'll see if we ever get to the Omo Valley, maybe not on this slideshow. This is where the original Ark of the Covenant is, presumably. Doesn't make that much difference to me, but it does to them. Very important document, and of course very ancient. I get the impression, especially in Addis, that religion is taken very seriously, as you'll see, of a Sunday morning. Ethiopia is referred, the emperor is referred to as the Lion of Judah. There's a lot of references to Judaism, which is sort of mysterious, but there are similarities, mostly because they use the Old Testament too, in addition to the New Testament. And their services are sort of similar. That is, women and men sit on different sides, and there is male circumcision. And of course, the Falashas were there. The Addis Ababa University is an important university, not the most important university in Africa by any means, or East Africa for that matter, but it's a pretty good university, I think, and there are 12 campuses around the country. And I'm sure in the new regime there'll be even more emphasis on education. Our guides were all college educated, but they said there are very few jobs for college educated people. So one of them was an accountant, one of them was in marketing. There were no jobs, so they became tour guides. I think I have the right church here. This is where Haile Selassie is buried. We spent quite a bit of time around here. Or this might be another church we went to the next day, I'm not sure. They're very pretty churches, and they have a bit of Italianate decorations. So there we were, entering this church. So Haile Selassie, about whom you've heard many things, I'm sure, was the last of the hereditary emperors, although when I try to delve into his background, he is not of royal blood at all. I don't quite understand that. I think he had a cousin that was, but I don't think he was. Anyway, that dated back to 980 BC and ended in 1975, this lineage of hereditary emperors. He allegedly was descended from Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. I guess all the emperors were, allegedly, which also accounts for the line of Judah reference. Ross is an honorary title, and so his name, when he ascended to the emperorship, was Rastafari. Does that sound familiar? Rastafari. And he was born in 1982. He took the name of Haile Selassie when he was crowned. But somehow in Jamaica, the people felt that he was the black god that was promised in the Bible somewhere. And they sort of worshipped him from afar in Jamaica. And the link, so many poor black Jamaicans thought this was going to be the savior. And actually when he came to Jamaica later on, he was worshipped as a god, and he didn't try to deny it. He thought, he came to believe that he was a pretty important guy. There are still, I think, 10,000 Rastas in Addis. And my daughter and I heard different things because we were at different times with our guides. I thought the guide, our guide, a young, very nice, college-educated man, said he was at one time a Rasta. And of course the Rastafarians have their dreadlocks, and they don't cut their hair. So he, to me anyway, my daughter says that's not right, but anyway, he pointed out to me, as you'll see, some people in Ethiopia have white turbans on covering their dreadlocks, and he said those were Rastas. In Jamaica the Rastas worship ganja, cannabis. I don't think that's true in Ethiopia. So, Haile Selassie gave Ethiopia's first written constitution, which in this case doesn't mean very much because it greatly restricted the powers of the parliament and greatly increased his powers. So he was allowed to succeed to the throne, and his descendants were, and the person of the emperor is sacred, his dignity inviolable, and his power indisputable. And that's the constitution he gave to the people. So constitutions are not always helpful. He was coronated, yeah, is that a word, in 1930, and Marcus Garvey, who was a Jamaican who was back to Africa movement, saw him as the Black King, and that there would be an exodus to Africa by the Rastafarians, which didn't happen, but they still practice Rastafarian in Jamaica. In 1935, Mussolini invaded Ethiopia. Selassie fled to England. He delivered a very famous speech to the League of Nations asking for help. He got some help, minimal, from Great Britain, but they were there for 5 years. It was not a pleasant occupation. But He did, with Britain's help, return to the throne in 1941. It was 1996 that he visited Jamaica and was greeted with a rapturous reception. And Bob Marley's wife was there, the great Jamaican singer. So that would be a very interesting side trip, but we won't go into that. This is Bob Marley. I once heard Bob Marley. I couldn't understand a word he was saying, but I gather it was very revolutionary. They were definitely anti-police. But in 1973, a terrible famine killed approximately 200,000 Ethiopians. And by that time, Haile Selassie's popularity was waning. He was ostentatiously displaying his wealth, his castles, his jewelry, everything else. Meanwhile, people were starving. And he was, I think, forcibly replaced by the Derg, which was a group of army officers with a Marxist agenda. A military coup, yeah. So they put him in prison. He died in 1975. He had accumulated and displayed great wealth that turned people against him. This is my version of reading history. I could be wrong, but correct. The Derg did not turn out to be a good regime for Ethiopia. He was considered disappeared. The white establishment was blamed. I'm not sure what the white establishment was, and this concept of I developed, the Rastafarian concept, referring to the essential unity of all humanity. Haile Selassie may have gone, but to see him as a single deity misunderstands the meaning of Rastafari. His spirit lies in all of us, they say, and can't be extinguished. From birth, we are all ephemeral bodies, but our souls live on. So that's something about the basic teachings of Rastafarian. He inspired many songs, including Bob Marley's song, which was almost a verbatim transcript of his speech to the League of Nations in 1963 about Mussolini's invasion. So, my daughter and I disagree. She says this is a holy man, but I'm sure my guide said he's a Rasta, and he wears a turban over his dreadlocks. But this is the church that Haile Selassie is buried in. This is not a particularly important guy, but I thought you'd like the picture because his grave is so beautifully decorated. Maybe he was important, I'm not sure. It's a woman wearing one of these shamas. I don't know that she's praying or what exactly is happening. This is the interior of the cathedral. Some of the paintings there you can see at a distance. Quite elegant. This is our guide. This is some of the stained glass. The stained glass windows portray different scenes from the Old Testament. So, quite elaborate stained glass, Moses. This is his tomb. He's in there somewhere. This was his throne. This was any emperor's throne until 1975, and now there are no more emperors. On the side, you see the lions of Judah. I guess referring again to the emperor's descent from the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon. Here we are, paying our respects. Here he is talking to Nasser of Egypt in 1963. He did a lot to sort of make peace with his neighbors. He was a very small man. Here is a statue of him. I heard him speak when I taught at Morehouse College. He was the invited speaker at commencement shortly before he died, I guess. Here's some of the outside of the cathedral here, or the church. I wish I could remember what these are for. They're not for people who are lame. That's not what they are for. What are they for? I can't remember. Anyway. This is one of the Coptic crosses, I hope that's right. And here's the surrounding cemetery, which is very beautiful. People come to hang out. Very early, children are taught to shake hands with everybody in the room, so here's a little guy shaking hands with my daughter. More of the cemetery. I had seen cemeteries in other places. I guess the first time I saw it was in Azerbaijan, where pictures of the deceased are on the tomb. And that's true here too. That's a great idea, I think. Now, I think this is a Rasta man. My daughter says he's a holy man. I think he's a Rasta. So, here's Addis. Not particularly at rush hour, but there's always a traffic jam there. I'm telling you, North Korea looks good after you see this because there aren't any cars in North Korea, so the streets are empty. But it's not true in Addis Ababa. So there's a lot of cars and a lot of traffic, which is true in Uganda too. I mean, it was just true everywhere. True everywhere. And this is an equestrian monument from some battle. So this brought us to lunchtime, and my daughter is a vegetarian, and so our guides said no problem being a vegetarian in Ethiopia because there's a lot of Christian holidays and fast days, and fasting in the Christian religion in Ethiopia means not eating meat. So there was no problem getting vegan and vegetarian food. So he took us to this hotel that was built in 1898, somehow had some relationship to music. And this, he explained the significance of this eye, which I don't remember. And there were some wonderful old portraits there. This is, I think, the original owners and builders of this hotel. And some, I think, tribal chiefs of old. And this is the vegan buffet. Very tasty, very good. There it is. So this is injera, that rolled up flatbread. This is darker injera than usual because, I don't know, can't remember why. Fermented longer, I don't know. Different flour or something. But this is a staple, of course, of all Ethiopian food. How many have eaten Ethiopian restaurants? Lots. Yeah. There's plenty of them. There's at least 4 of them, I think, in San Diego. Yeah. There's one called the Abyssinian restaurant on Park Boulevard, which is sort of a modified Ethiopian. Not a bad place to start, but there's the Blue Nile, there's Asmar, I think, I can't remember. So usually the meal is served on the injera. I mean, it is served on the injera. And then you pick up the injera with the food. So this is a non-vegetarian meal with many stews on it, lots. And a typical dish would consist of injera and a spicy stew, which could include beef, lamb, vegetables, and various types of legumes such as lentils. You will not find any pork products in Ethiopia. Neither the Christians nor the Muslims will eat pork. So pigs are sort of extinct as a species in Ethiopia. And true in the Middle East too, actually. So this is how you eat the food. We could have an outing sometime. Go to one of these restaurants. Our guy, so we were looking at this couple's elegant dinner they were having. And our guide took us over and we introduced ourselves to them. They were absolutely elegant couple. This is lunchtime and they're all dressed up. And they explained what was in their bowl. Looked very good.
In that bowl, I don't see anything, spoons or anything.
No, you eat with your fingers. You scoop up the food with the injera. Yeah, no spoons, no forks.
Those,
and when we went back to our car, this woman was begging with her baby. Looked a lot like Mexico. but she was smiling. This is the Ministry of Finance. Very impressive, and they are making great strides in economic development there. These are some modern apartments, I think, I don't know, I was going to say atypical for Addis, but maybe not. And this is another view of modern Addis. Looks very impressive, but if you go in the back streets, they're crumbling and people living in shacks and corrugated tin places, and well, you'll see the market in a minute. This is light rail, which we didn't take, but that's part of 5,000 kilometers of railways in the country, and they're building more. This is the market. We spent almost 2 hours in the market. It was very interesting. It went on, I don't know, I would say for a 3-mile square piece of land.
Are those
And
tourists on the street? They're not dressed like.
they are not tourists, they are natives. And people dress every which way in Ethiopia, but especially in Addis, they wear modern clothes or they wear scarves like mine, as you'll see in a minute. So most of the stuff is on the ground, homegrown, a local farmer's market as it were. And it's a big mess there. It's not a very dignified market. But they have a lot of stuff, and if I had had more small change, I would have wandered through it and probably bought half the market out, because there were some very nice clothes and jewelry, but I didn't, and there were mobs of people in the street. I mean mobs. So my daughter Kamala got out, and she went with the guide, and I stayed in the bus, because it was very interesting just to stay there and watch the people go by. So this is a little more history. The 1970s and 1980s were a period of political economic turmoil in Ethiopia. The country was led by a brutal military leader, and the country faced civil war, famine, and failed socialist development policies. Since 1991, the country's political situation has been relatively stable, and rising living standards have followed, but still the media was repressed and freedoms were not very evident. That's when all the political prisoners were imprisoned. So here's all the stuff, not all the stuff, this is just maybe 1/1000th of the whole market there. There are like blocks and blocks of electronic stuff which comes from China. It was, and Korea, South Korea, I guess. And our guide and several other people that we talked to said China is definitely taking over, and especially in the electronic market. So by 2050, the UN expects the country to grow to 190 million people from around 100 million people now, making it one of the fastest growing large countries in terms of population. I don't think this is a good trend myself, because I don't think the country's prepared to take care of all these people, but that's just my opinion. So here you see people in all kinds of dress. Here's a pregnant woman, she's wearing one of these shamas, but other people are wearing street clothes that we see anywhere in San Diego. Shoes are a big thing. Many of them are recycled from tires. You'll see that soon. This is a bustling concern, this market. I tell you, it goes on and on and on and on. This was a woman right across from the bus, so I sort of kept an eye on her. And she apparently had bought some fruits and vegetables that she grew at home and had laid them out on a sheet or something on the ground. And people were buying things from her. So she probably went home with a little money in her pocket. You can see a lot of the plastics, buckets and stuff that there are. And all this stuff is being transported around on human donkeys, essentially. School supplies. Sheets and towels. Children's clothes, but some of those stores in the back are just regular stores, and the market is where people come and just lay their stuff down. This lady on the left had red hair, very fashionable clothing and jewelry. She did not look like anybody else I'd seen in all of Ethiopia, but she was Ethiopian. And the woman on the right was more typical. So Ethiopia's economy is concentrated in the services and agricultural sectors. Of the 10, almost 11% annual growth between 2004 and 2014, half came from services like hospitality and transportation, which is mostly a result of the country's urbanization. It is sort of a big tourist place. I think most tourists come from Africa, but there are Western tourists there too, for sure, as you'll see later on, maybe not in this series. Agriculture only accounted 3.6% of the growth. It needs to be probably improved, and I think the Chinese are working on that. And manufacturing is improving at about more than 10% a year. Ethiopia was the most likely country in Africa to become the new China. That's quite interesting, so keep an eye on Ethiopia. Here's some very pretty clothing that the women were wearing in the market. She's filling up her oil tank. Here's another country lady who brought in some spices. Some women cover their heads, some don't. Here's some handicrafts that people had. This woman on the left is wearing, to me, such an absolutely gorgeous outfit. And beautiful shells of beads. I would love to know more about her. And then people carry their groceries and their babies in these slings on the back. Here she is. She has a baby in the back. Notice the baby's hairdo. You see a lot of that. Little tiny guys, I think it's like a little guy, has this very elaborate shaved head with this fancy hair in the middle. I saw that in the tribal areas, but also around Addis. Interesting. But her outfit is absolutely beautiful, I thought. She's quite beautiful herself. Here's more women in shamas and kids on the street doing God knows what. So there's many rows of these places where they store tires and other plastic stuff, and they make recycled things out of them, like shoes. This woman on the left is wearing what you'll see tomorrow people wear for Sunday Mass. This is an injera basket where they serve injera, hand-woven, beautiful. You see these in Morocco too. What is that supposed to be? That's supposed to be pretty shaman. Yeah, it's not pretty shave, no. It's very much like the one I have, and it's more like the ones we borrowed to go to Mass. This is part of the market where the men hang out and recycle stuff. You know, so when you see beautiful Addis and the high-rise and everything, you see this kind of stuff on the back streets very often. Okay, this has nothing to do with Addis except that it's a chain store in the West which makes shoes from the market, from recycled tires. Some enterprising Ethiopians started these chain of stores to sell these shoes, and they're quite attractive, as you can see. This is not a store. Yes. This is a statue of somebody, another monument. You heard some of the music in the introduction where people were at the rally for Abiy. And it's very diverse because there are 80 ethnic groups there, and so the music is, there's modern music, there's ancient music, there's tribal music. And most of the music is on a pentatonic scale, which makes it sound a little bit like Asian music. And the lyrics are usually associated with patriotism or national pride, which I assume that's what we were hearing in that big rally. And then there's a unique type of memoir music called tazita, I'm sorry to say we didn't learn enough about that. We missed the final banquet on the last night where we were supposed to be exposed to all the foods and the tribal costumes and the dancing and everything. But we were both in bed with our various ailments, so we didn't go to that. But he's a very popular singer, this guy, Mahmoud Ahmed. In fact, you can go to YouTube and find lots of his recordings. That's one of them, but I'm not going to go to that. Okay, so this was Saturday, and Sunday is Mass. Big celebration all over the city. And we had to have a Shema to go there. And so our guides borrowed these, not this one, from their sisters. And so we could go there and be presentable. We really couldn't go there in our regular clothes without one. So that's my daughter's Shema. And this is the cathedral, which I think I passed off as the other cathedral. I don't know. But anyway, it's a huge cathedral. And as you can see, there are many people there. And here we are, looking just like everybody else. And entering. So this is an interesting factoid, that almost all Ethiopians use a 12-hour clock, with one cycle from 1 to 12 from dawn to dusk, and the other from dusk to dawn. So unlike the convention in most countries, the start of the day is dawn, rather than midnight. So 7 a.m. in East Africa time corresponds to 1 o'clock in daylight hours in local Ethiopian time. It's complicated, and often our guides would say, well, pick you up at 7 o'clock. What? 7 o'clock? No, I mean 2 o'clock. And he would be going by Ethiopian time, and we didn't know what he was talking about until they finally explained to us why there's a difference in how they record, not record time, but talk about time. You can hear the chanting. That's our guide on the right. That's Colin on the left. That chanting has been going on, this is about 9 o'clock. We were allowed to sleep in since 7 o'clock in the morning, that chanting. This is a cross on our guide's Shema. It's not called the male Shema, it's not this. Wrong word. I'm not sure what he's doing there. It's a very patriarchal religion. All the patriarchs are patriarchs. There's no matriarchs. This is a piece of art that I actually took pictures of in northern Ethiopia. But here are people in their Shemas, even the little girls. This is the woman's entrance to the church, to the cathedral. And I'm wearing a patterned skirt today that I did not get in Ethiopia, but because there's so many interesting patterns of skirts, I decided I'd wear this one with the Shemas. I don't know how this guy got in, but that's the women's entrance. That's what goes on there for hours. Now, her skirt was really beautiful. They're all chanting or doing something. I would judge that, at least in Addis, there's a lot of religiosity, or people are deeply religious. And it's such a contrast with the women in their white and people chanting and standing there respectfully from the market the day before, where people were buying stuff off the sidewalk and everything else. I guess people learn to live with whatever they have, and these people are very religious. So we got into the church. If you remember in Islam, of course, the men and women pray separately because, presumably, when women bend down that way, the men get very distracted. I don't know that that's true in Ethiopia, or anywhere else for that matter. Here's some of the murals in the churches, on the ceiling actually. I don't know what Batman is doing there, but they're very unusual. I thought this church had very unusual stained glass. Not like the other stained glass that you saw in the other cathedral, but this is very sort of modern design stained glass. I was particularly interested in showing it to Carolyn Morse, who's in Bali right now, because she doesn't like that fancy stained glass, but I think she would like these. I thought these were really beautiful. Anyway, here's the cathedral again.
Why do women cover their heads and men do not cover their heads?
Why do women cover their heads and men don't cover their heads? It's true everywhere. No, it's not true in the Jewish religion, I guess, but it's certainly true in Islam. And it's true here. I don't know. As I said, it's a patriarchal religion. People don't sit, by the way, during this whole entire service. A lot of bowing. I think this is why I left religion, because I couldn't stand the whole ritual here. I just took some fashion pictures here of different materials. I love this picture. This is some kind of family scene. Amazing variety of women's clothes. Little girl has knee socks. So cute. Here's a dad with a shema. I don't know what gender shema he has, but he's covering his two boys. Very sweet little picture, I thought. Okay, so this guy on the left is a holy man or a Rasta. I'm not sure which. This woman is doing something important with this thing, and I'm not sure what it is. More fashion pictures. You can see in the background modern Ethiopia. This cathedral takes up a huge amount of prime real estate. And it's very beautiful. At the end, instead of whatever people get to eat at the end, there's a woman here with a stand, and she gives rolled up injera. It's very dark. I can't remember again why it's dark. And it tastes different. It tastes very malty. But it's good for you. It's fermented, and the ingredients are good for you. There it is. She's giving it out. Now that man is wearing something on his head. He's a patriarch. On the way out, there was another small church, and they were selling these biblical books, mostly from the Old Testament, in Amharic, of course. There's the other little church. You can get some very nice outfits if you're a patriarch. She's a beggar. It was a good spot for her, actually. I hope she made out. Because people were leaving the church feeling, I'm sure, very charitable. It was off and on, looked like it was going to rain the whole time we were there, so this is an umbrella stand, but the beautiful umbrellas. Okay, so the next day we went to the famous National Museum of Ethiopia, and we went to see Lucy, among other things. So it's not a very well presented museum, but the most well-known hominid discovery is Australia's Africanus lucy, known locally as Dinkinesh, and I don't know why. The specimen was found in Awash Valley of Ethiopia's Afar region in 1974 by Donald Johansen. I know him. And is one of the most complete and best preserved adult Australopithecus fossils ever uncovered. So her name refers to where she was discovered, and she was estimated to have lived, get this, 3.2 million years ago. 3.2 million years ago. It's astonishing. And this tells you the general geography of where these specimens were found. I think it's assumed now that Africa was the place from which human beings came, and probably along the Rift Valley somewhere. That's Lucy. Her taxonomic name had to do with where she came from. I knew Don Johansen. He was a big drug user, and I think she was named for Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, actually, which is LSD. Anyway, that's beside the point. Here's more maps of where these human remains were found. Here's a picture of her vertically. So, some of the oldest skeletal evidence of anatomically modern humans was found in Ethiopia. It is widely considered as the region from which modern humans first set out for the Middle East and places beyond. So, we've been around for a while. This is not Lucy. This is another humanoid. This is Lucy in a restaurant dressed up. And of course, in actuality, in the museum, she doesn't look anything like that, but she looks pretty classy in this restaurant. We are leaving now. Let's see what time it is. It's 11 o'clock. Okay, so we're now leaving Addis, and this is at the airport, this woman with the coffee ceremony. And Ethiopian Blessed Coffee brand bags in Tacoma Park, Maryland. Coffee is one of Ethiopia's main exports, and it's quite good. I don't usually drink coffee, but I was drinking it all over the place. Okay, I think we need to stop now, and I'll show the Omo Valley and Lalibela at another time, so stay tuned, because the Omo Valley is completely 2,000% different from anything you've seen in Addis.